Today, at 72 years old, he shares a tiny room that smells of medicine in a third-rate nursing home. His own children betrayed him. While he stares at the door waiting for a visit that never comes, his children are already in the courts, fighting over his inheritance. This is the curse of useless sacrifice. And if you are giving up your life to leave wealth for healthy adults, you need to hear this before it's too late. His name is Arthur. But it could be your name. It could be your father's name. It could be the name of any man who was taught from a very early age that the worth of a head of household is measured by the size of the estate he leaves behind when he dies. Arthur believed that lie with every ounce of his soul. For 4 decades, his routine was a machine that ground up flesh and dreams. He would wake up at 5 in the morning, drink a reheated black coffee, and get into his car, a car he had kept for 15 years. The upholstery was already torn. The engine made a constant noise, and his co-workers traded in their vehicles every 3 years. But Arthur would just smile, tap the steering wheel, and say, "I don't care about luxuries. I'm investing in my children's future." What future was that? Arthur built a wall of bricks and cement around his own family. He bought the first apartment, then a vacant lot, then a beach house that he himself almost never visited because he was always too busy working on the weekends to pay the fees and taxes on all of it. He had a wonderful wife, Helena. Helena's greatest dream in life was to see Italy. She kept clippings from old magazines, imagined walking through the streets of Rome, drinking a glass of wine in some random plaza. But every year, when vacation time approached, Arthur would sit down at the kitchen table, open his accounting notebooks, and say, "Helena, my love, this year we can't." An incredible opportunity came up to buy a plot of land in the South Zone. It's for the boys. One day, they'll thank us. And Helena would sigh. She would fold the magazine clippings and put them away at the back of the drawer. She accepted the sacrifice in silence because, just like Arthur, she believed that loving her children meant erasing her own existence. Arthur's pain was not visible to the world. He was highly respected. At Sunday lunch, the family looked at him as the great provider, the Iron Man, the one who felt no cold, who felt no exhaustion, who didn't need long trips or new clothes. He wore the same faded suits and felt a dangerously sick pride in that. He had turned his own deprivation of life into a gold trophy. But at night, when he laid his head on the pillow, the silence of the early morning hours brought a bill that his accounting couldn't balance. He felt his back ache, his knees give out, his own youth slipping through his fingers like fine sand. He saw photos of his friends traveling, dining in expensive places, laughing, while he spent his Saturday calculating the exact yield of the next month's rent. Arthur convinced himself that his sacrifice was noble. He looked at his children already grown, strong, graduated from the best universities paid for with the sweat of that same old car, and thought, "They are safe. I have fulfilled my duty as a father." But what Arthur didn't know, what the financial system never tells the men who surrender themselves to that altar of cement and greed disguised as paternal love, is that when you hand over absolutely everything to someone who never had to sweat for it, you don't create gratitude, you create dependency. You create people who start to look at your estate not as a sacred gift, but as an overdue right. The worst part of building an altar of sacrifice is that one day The gods you placed up there will demand that you bleed until the very last drop. 8 months after Helena's death, Arthur's fortress began to crumble. The woman who had endured the weight of his deprivations for 40 years departed on a gray Tuesday, taking with her the only trace of human warmth that still existed in that house full of deeds and empty of memories. Arthur cried, but true to his Iron Man character, the next day he was back to his spreadsheets, calculating the rent adjustment on one of his warehouses. He believed that work cured everything. He believed that pain was just a temporary weakness. But the human body is not a machine, and it always collects the bill for sleepless nights and stress swallowed dry. On a Sunday afternoon, while reviewing the off-the-books contracts alone, the left side of Arthur's face went numb. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering on the ceramic floor. The stroke was silent, swift, and completely devastating. When the ambulance finally arrived, the great provider, the man who had built an empire of bricks to protect his family from any crisis, had become an absolute prisoner of his own body. Arthur's mind remained intact. He could hear, he could understand what was being said around him. He could feel the cold texture of the hospital sheets, but his muscles did not respond. He could no longer walk on his own. He could not hold a spoon to feed himself. He could barely form sentences that didn't sound like a slurred, confused whisper. And it was at this exact moment of total vulnerability that the real tragedy of his life began. It was here that the masks of gratitude began to fall, one by one. The children soon arrived at the hospital. Marcos, the oldest, now a respected director of a logistics company, and Camila, the youngest, an architect with her own firm. Both were raised in the best schools in the city. Both had their studies and trips financed by the tireless sweat of their father and the absence of luxuries from their mother. At first, in front of the doctors, there was crying and despair. But the tears dried up incredibly fast when the medical team called them in for a private meeting and handed over the real prognosis of the situation. Arthur would need 24-hour-a-day care. He would require daily physical therapy, private nurses, complex adaptations to the house, and a strictly controlled diet. It was a high-end structure necessary to ensure he had a minimum of dignity and comfort in the years he had left. And then, like an ironic blow of fate, the cold mathematics that Arthur had used his entire life to accumulate assets turned against him. Instead of joining forces to take care of the man who had given up his own life for them, Marcos and Camila pulled out their calculators. A luxury nursing clinic and a private medical team would cost a fortune every month. That money would have to come directly from their father's estate. It would have to come from the sale of one of the apartments he had fought so hard to buy. In short, the medical care would have to come out of their future inheritance. The silence that settled between the siblings in the hospital corridor was the most deafening sound Arthur had ever heard. To protect the deeds, to not diminish even a single cent of the amount they would receive in the future, the children made a decision sheltered by the false excuse of common sense. They convinced themselves and the distant relatives that the father wouldn't notice the difference between one place and another due to his health condition. They said that a traditional nursing home, much further from the city and with drastically lower costs, would be the ideal and peaceful environment for his rest. They took the Iron Man, the patriarch, who had sacrificed his wife's dream of seeing Italy, who had sacrificed his own knees and his own youth and shipped him off to a room with peeling walls, the strong smell of institutional cleaning products, and a single narrow window that looked out onto a gray-stained wall. Arthur, trapped in his paralysis, watched it all without being able to scream. He saw his children sign the papers for the cheapest nursing home in the region while flaunting designer clothes and the expensive watches that he, indirectly, had paid for with his own freedom. But the final stab, the blow that annihilated Arthur's soul once and for all, happened in the second month at the nursing home. It was a Sunday morning, visiting day. Marcos and Camila were in the corridor, just outside the room, talking in low voices, thinking their father was asleep, or that his mind was too deteriorated to comprehend any complex word. But Arthur's hearing was perfect. He clearly heard when the older son said, with a frightening coldness, "You know we need to resolve the beach house issue soon before the government blocks everything with a long probate. I always wanted that lot, Camila. We transfer it to my name this week, and I'll compensate you with the difference using the value of the downtown apartment." On that narrow single bed, with his eyes fixed on the ceiling of a place where he should never have been, a single silent tear rolled down Arthur's twisted face. He finally understood the colossal extent of his failure. The 40 years of sacrifice had not generated love. It had not generated family unity. It had not generated grateful children. The enormous inheritance had become nothing more than a piece of bloody meat thrown into the middle of the desert. And the children he had sworn so much to protect had become merely impatient vultures, circling above the bed, waiting for the exact moment to devour what was left. Arthur's tear was not only one of sadness, it was the unbearable pain of a moral bankruptcy. He had spent his entire life believing he was building an empire of security. But in truth, he had built his own prison, and this is exactly where most men make the most brutal mistake of their existence. We are conditioned to believe that a good father is the one who erases his own life to ensure his children start the race 10 steps ahead. We beat our chests, swallow our exhaustion, wear old clothes, and tell ourselves in the mirror that we are doing the right thing, that we are building a legacy. But pay very close attention to what I am going to tell you now, because this is the most merciless rule of human behavior. Money that was not sweated for does not generate gratitude. It generates arrogance. When you hand over the world on a silver platter to healthy adults, you are not creating strong heirs. You are creating chronic dependence. You are teaching their subconscious that your role on earth is merely to be an open safe, an inexhaustible provider of conveniences. And the human mind is dangerous terrain. What begins as a gift quickly turns into a habit. What becomes a habit soon converts into an expectation. An expectation inevitably becomes corrupted and turns into a blind demand. Marcos and Camila were not monsters born from the shadows. They were the direct product of the system that Arthur himself created. By shielding them from any financial frustration, he stole from them the ability to give value to sacrifice. And Arthur's greatest cruelty was not against his children. The greatest cruelty, the unforgivable crime he committed, was against Helena, the woman who slept beside him for 40 years, the woman who accepted every no, who kept the magazine clippings of Italy at the back of the drawer, who smiled while watching her own youth evaporate to feed the family safe. Arthur traded the golden years he should have lived alongside the love of his life for real estate deeds that, in the end, served only to finance the greed of those who abandoned him at the very moment he needed them most. He did not buy security. He bought his own loneliness. Do you realize the gravity of this? Look at your own life right now. How many times have you failed to take your wife out to dinner at a special place because you needed to save up to replace your son's car, the son who is already 30 years old? How many times have you postponed the trip of your dreams, the one you promised yourself when you were still young, because you thought it would be more prudent to buy another lot or put a few more thousand into their savings? You are acting exactly like Arthur. You are building your own altar of sacrifice, expecting that in the future they will give it all back to you in the form of love and care. But the market of life does not operate with interest paid in gratitude. Your wealth, the one you built by waking up early, swallowing your boss's insults, losing nights of sleep, should serve your own life first. It should serve your comfort, your health, your peace of mind, and the happiness of those who stood by your side when you had nothing. A truly wise father does not leave his children a mountain of money to be divided in a courtroom. A wise father leaves values, leaves education, leaves the example of a man who worked hard, but who also knew how to live with dignity. Let your adult, healthy children sweat their own shirts. Let them build their own empires. Your obligation to carry the world on your back ended the moment they became adults. Understand once and for all that blind sacrifice is not a virtue, it is a trap. Wealth accumulated without purpose destroys the soul of the one who hoards it and corrupts the character of the one who receives it. Arthur understood this too late, lying on a nursing home bed, listening to the early division of his assets. But you still have time. You still have the key to your safe, and more importantly, you still have the key to your own life. Arthur's tear, sliding silently down his face in that dark, lifeless room, was not just the cry of a sick man. It was the crushing weight of a moral bankruptcy. He had spent his entire life blindly believing that he was building an empire of security, but in reality, he had built, brick by brick, his own prison. And it is exactly here, at this tragic point, that the vast majority of honest, hard-working men commit the most brutal and irreparable mistake of their existence. We are conditioned from the time we are boys to believe that a good father is one who erases himself, the one who bleeds out his own life to ensure his children start the race 10 steps ahead. We beat our chests with pride, swallow our chronic exhaustion, wear old clothes, ignore the pain in our bodies, and tell ourselves in the mirror every morning that we are doing the right thing, that we are building an untouchable legacy. But pay very close attention to what I am going to tell you now. Look me straight in the eyes, because this is the most merciless rule of human behavior. Money that was not sweated for does not generate gratitude. It generates arrogance. It generates the worst kind of presumption, that poisonous feeling that the world, and especially their parents, owe them something by right of blood. When you hand over the world on a silver platter to children who are already adults and perfectly healthy, you are not in any way creating strong heirs for your empire. You are creating chronic dependence. You are teaching their subconscious that your role on earth is merely to be an open safe, an inexhaustible provider of conveniences and shortcuts. And the human mind, my friend, is extremely dangerous terrain when it is not pruned by sacrifice. What begins as a generous gift quickly turns into a habit. What becomes a habit in a short time converts into a silent expectation. And expectation inevitably becomes corrupted and turns into a blind demand. Marcos and Camilla were not monsters born from the shadows to torment their father. They were the direct and perfectly calculated product of the system that Arthur himself created and fed for 40 years. By shielding them from any financial frustration, by armoring them against the sweat that forges a man's character, he stole from them the most important capacity of all, the capacity to give value to the sacrifice of others. They did not see the beach house as the result of the lost weekends of an exhausted father. They saw only a financial asset that belonged to them and that needed to be liquidated. But do you want to know what Arthur's greatest cruelty was? It was not against his children. The greatest cruelty, the unforgivable crime he committed every day, was against Helena, the woman who slept beside him for 4 decades, the woman who accepted every no with a sad smile, who kept the magazine clippings of the trip to Italy in the dark back of the drawer, who watched her own youth evaporate to feed the safe of a family that, in the end, gave absolutely nothing back. Arthur traded the golden years he should have lived alongside the love of his life for papers, for real estate deeds, and numbers on a bank screen that, at the end of the line, served only to finance the greed of those who abandoned him at the moment he most needed a helping hand. He did not buy security for his old age. He bought, with extremely high interest, his own loneliness. Do you realize the overwhelming gravity of this? Look at your own life right now. How many times have you failed to take your wife out to dinner at a special place because you needed to save up to replace your son's car, the son who is already 30 years old and has strong arms to work with? How many times have you postponed the trip of your dreams, the one you promised yourself when you were still a young man full of energy, because you thought it would be more prudent to buy another lot or put a few more thousand into their savings? You are acting exactly like Arthur. You are building your daily altar of sacrifice, feeding the illusion that in the future, when your hair is white and your legs fail, they will give it all back to you in the form of love, respect, and unrestricted care. But engrave this on your soul right now. The market of real life does not operate with interest paid in gratitude. Your wealth should serve your life and your comfort, not the greed of those who never shed a single drop of sweat for it. If you had the courage to listen to this hard truth until the very last second, and you refuse to end your life like Arthur, comment the word "awakened" down below, so I know who the truly strong ones are who follow this channel. Take the opportunity to leave your like so this message gains strength and wakes up other fathers before it's too late. And subscribe now so you don't miss the next lesson. Your true legacy begins today.